The Fiji studies was fascinating because Fiji, remote area, halfway around the world, had no evidence of eating disorders prior to the study. And with the people on the island, more robust figures were coveted, were idealized, because if you live on a small island or set of islands in the middle of a very large ocean, the idea of dying off sort of always looms in the distance. So procreating's really important for survival. So apparently we had lost track of that ourselves, but that was idealized. I think 94 was the first year through satellite television that Beverly Hills 90210 was beamed to the island. Within, I think, 4 years, there were 37 cases of eating disorders on the island. I might be off just a little, but an unusually large amount of eating disorders on the island. And I think they went back another 4 years later, and that trend had continued.
What is the understanding? Because we here can make an assumption based on the information you're giving us, but our assumption might be off. So what is actually the interpretation of
So I think if you're a
happening?
young Fijian girl and you see sort of glamorous Hollywood starlets, and you have that picture in your mind that they are idealized and they are thin, then the two must go together. So again, in the absence of data, human beings make up stories. So the story that I think was being written then was, I have to be thin to be a Hollywood starlet, and a Hollywood starlet is admired and coveted and glamorous and good. So looking at the starlets on TV, good. Looking at me, perhaps on Fiji as more of a robust figure, not good. I think it brought a lot of body shame.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah. So can you talk about also, based on that, sort of moving into the question I have about the presumption, and you were saying that in the 90s, the sort of the face of eating disorders evolved, at least as you were a clinician seeing people, you would, I guess, start to see people who didn't look like me. I realize that eating disorders in and of themselves have different incarnations with each person, right? Each person develops their own sort of set of rules that might look quite different. When different people, different looking people show up, different socioeconomic backgrounds as well, can you talk about what that looks like and what that is? And you may not have the data on what are the percentages.
Probably don't have the data on everything, but anecdotally I can tell you what we saw and some of what I've read. We did see a certain population of female Asian Americans, and a lot of their eating disorders, the underlying issues were acculturation, like I want to fit in, I don't want to look Korean or Laotian, I want to look American. So hence that sort of Beverly Hills 90210 thing. It also had to do with immense academic pressure. So in other words, if my parents immigrated here, I must make them proud by having straight A's or perfect scores on everything. So there was a lot of perceived and actual pressure. I mean, we talk about the tiger mom. This is the mom who wants her child to succeed and exerts a lot of overt pressure academically. And on one hand, as a mom, I guess I can kind of understand that. On the other hand, I imagine that I'm that young adolescent who's trying to juggle social fears, my body changing around puberty, and a new school, a new country, and I've got mom on my back saying I have to make straight A's and be valedictorian. Sometimes it's overwhelming.
Right.
And so that's what we saw with Asian Americans. With Hispanic Americans, a lot of what I saw was acculturation. So Hispanic women tend to have fuller figures, think Jennifer Lopez, very proud of them, and yet with acculturation, they sort of wanted, what they would talk about is they didn't like their hips. So they wanted to use the eating disorder to make their hips smaller, not necessarily their chest, pardon me, but their hips. So, your bones really aren't going to change. So they were usually not successful. But a lot of that was wanting to fit in, being part of the group, which again speaks to safety, because if you're looking at adolescents, I don't want to find out that the new school I've just been transferred to, or my mom and dad signed me up for, is where Lindsay Lohan and the rest of the Mean Girls go. So having an eating disorder, again, can help me feel safe. The other things that we saw was a significant influx of military personnel. And I think Air Force had the lowest population of eating disorders, and the Marines had the highest.
Is that because there are the least women in Air Force, or no?
The only article that I think I've read on it that spoke to that point had to do with the author thought that people in the Air Force had higher IQ scores. If you can see the disdain in my expression, eating disorders don't have anything to do with intelligence. They have to do with emotion. They have to do with, lots of being able to manage our emotions. If you look at the Marines that have significantly more than any other branch, it's their body, not a plane, that's being put out there on the field. And I've just heard so many stories because the military, Dana McNulty did a great article in 1994 just about eating disorders and people in the Navy. It was a groundbreaking article at the time, and she pointed out that a lot of their meals were carb heavy. They were intended to give quick energy. It totally makes sense, doesn't it? That's what I want, right? What I've also heard was an attitude, and I've heard this on more than one occasion, is that the PT or the morning exercise routine with Marines would often be so rigorous that some people would end up spontaneously vomiting. That in and of itself, I personally find disturbing. Over and above that, the ritual, again, I've heard this from more than one person, is that the group would circle around the person and praise them and cheer and clap. And so as an eating disorder therapist, I have to say I really, that rubbed me the wrong way. It was a sign, in other words, I think in the absence of data, make up stories, the story was, oh, you worked so hard that you made yourself throw up. Quite possibly so, and yet is that necessary? I'm not sure that a trainer would say that that's necessary.
Yeah.
We were also seeing a higher prevalence in dependents, particularly in spouses. I've seen ones where the spouse became so forlorn because when you work abroad, there's a higher...
You're saying military dependents, so like the people whose families were in the military. Okay, got it.
Right, okay. Wives or children. When you work abroad, you have a higher pay differential.
So you want to work, so it incentivizes you to leave your family.
To leave your family for long periods of time. And so the mother, is often overworked. And if she developed an eating disorder, very often we would find that the military would bring the husband home to care for the kids. That could be unconsciously reinforcing. So that's hard. Plus with kids, military is often relocated every 3 to 4 years when their sort of contract is up. And so if you're an adolescent and you're just going into your 4th school in 10 years and you're in adolescence in the middle of puberty and all of a sudden your ears are bigger than they ever were and and maybe you're bulking up before you shoot up, right? And all of a sudden Lindsay Lohan is in this new school. Then again, I don't want to be made fun of, so it's a protection. The other community, several communities, the trans community, but also the LGBTQ plus community. This goes back probably 100 years. There's been a lot of studies in males for restriction as reducing libido. So if you're a young male and you're growing up in a household where your family is homophobic, and you're starting to develop sexual urges for the same sex, but that that that's not going to go over well, then the eating disorder is looked at as as helpful, because let me slow down puberty, slow down these urges, because I don't want my family to reject me.
Mm-hmm.
So Arthur Crisp from Britain wrote about that a lot, and it does happen. In the trans community, if you're going from male to female, but the original male body perhaps is very tall, maybe even swimmer-like, where you have some broad shoulders. I had a client who wanted to restrict in order to stunt his growth and hold it there until he was able to have the blockers and surgery. So the eating disorder was valuable in helping him become a more attractive female from his perspective.
Less broad.
But in summary, I guess eating disorders for males are far more about muscularity. Let me just overtly show you that I'm strong, and about managing anger.
So with males, if they're about muscularity, and let me show you that I'm strong, it's about reducing fat to show muscle, not about making yourself small to take up less space.
Bingo.
Right.
No, they want to take up more space, really.
Yes, very interesting, right?
See me, right?
Right. And with women, it is often, I'm guessing, about taking up less space.
Yep. Disappearing sometimes.
Yeah.
I think it's also one of the things that I really love. It was one of Brené Brown's TED Talks, and she talks about signing some books. She was at a book signing, and father had like 3 or 4 books, and he said, "Have you ever studied men and shame?" Because Brené Brown's a shame and resilience researcher. And she said, "No, I've never studied men." And the man responded, "Well, that's convenient." And then he went on to say, "Because these books that you're signing for my wife and my daughters, they're back there in the crowd, they would die rather than see me fall off my white horse." And Brené Brown goes on to talk about what she has found in her research is that men's biggest fear is being seen as weak.
Right, or not be able to provide, right?
And hers was being weak, and I think that could be translated into financial, or will you protect me, and so if you look at sort of bigorexia, which is that part of the muscle definition for eating disorders, I can't be weak, I can't be vulnerable, I have to put on this show, and that can be exhausting at times.
Yeah.
I thought it was very insightful and does relate to eating disorders for males.